Now, it has been hitting shelves everywhere. The book I'm talking about is 50 Shades of Grey, selling more than 20 million copies in the US, over 30 million copies worldwide. Now, we want to know today on Expresso, firstly, 50 Shades of Grey, have you read it at all? And secondly, do you think it's just a reading phenomenon, or is it actually good writing? We want to know if the plot and the characters sound a bit like Twilight, or if it is really modeled after a really good romance novel. And Rebecca Davis, a columnist for the Daily Maverick, is in studio to discuss what's behind all the hype and whether this book is any good at all. Rebecca, we were chatting off air for a moment, but I want to know from you, before we chat about how good the book is, for someone who hasn't read the book before, I haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, but I know Nolene from 3 Talk and Anele, a radio presenter and TV presenter, both have read the book. They've been tweeting about it. They love it. What is the book about?
I mean, at heart, it's about a sexual relationship between the world's youngest 21-year-old and the world's oldest 27-year-old. So our heroine is this woman called Anastasia Steele. She's a 21-year-old college graduate. And why I say that she's the world's youngest ever 21-year-old is because she says she's barely ever been kissed. She's never been drunk. We might applaud this behavior, but it just does seem slightly implausible in the context of a 21-year-old American college student. But she has this great quirk, which is that she's obsessed with British classic novels, which is a genre that actually doesn't exist, but we'll let that go. So she's obsessed with Mr. Darcy, Mr. Heathcliff, Rochester, those kinds of heroes from the classic novels. And as a result, she has these kind of impossible ideals about what men are like. Then she meets Christian Grey, who's the world's oldest 27-year-old. That because he cruises around in a big car, listening to 16th century choral music and dispensing these little sound bites of business advice to her. Business is all about people, Miss Steele. And she absolutely falls for this. It doesn't hurt that he's a gazillionaire. He runs this telecommunications empire, but spends literally no time doing any work, and all of his time emailing her, like a 15-year-old with a new Mixit account, which obviously is absolutely divine for her. He also has this dark and tortured past, which becomes increasingly obvious as to what it is, basically from the first paragraph. And so the rest of the book is basically taken up between the sadomasochistic sexual relationship they enter into and the email correspondence between the two characters in order to get to this point and to sustain it. Of those two factors, the sex scenes are far preferable to the email exchanges, which are intolerable. If you can imagine what it's like eavesdropping on email exchanges between two people you don't care about at all, how boring that would be. He signs every email Laters Babe, which he thinks is just priceless, to die for, really sexy. The sex scenes are extremely varied, and there are a lot of them. This book is chock-a-block with sex. I cannot imagine that there's anyone in the world who would put this book down and go, you know what, I quite liked it, but there just wasn't quite enough sex. There is sex every page.
But on that being said, is it any good? And what is the hype around it?
I mean, I think those are two separate questions. Is it any good? No, it's terrible. The dirtiest thing about this book is how astoundingly rubbish the writing is. The woman has a vocabulary of about 200 words. She repeats these stock phrases about the characters. Anastasia Steele's breath is always halting and gasping and hitching. You just want to give her an asthma pump. I mean, it's embarrassing in that regard. But as for the hype, well, it's the first book to enter the mainstream that is directed at women and has so much sex in it. So from that perspective, you can see how there's also a kind of frisson for women whereby they want to read it to find out what it's about, and it's also a bit embarrassing to be seen reading it or discussing it. So, which is why it's been huge for e-readers, Kindles, iPads, where you can read it and tell people you're reading War and Peace, and you're actually getting your jollies from 50 Shades.
Well, we've seen a lot of people going public about the book. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us and sharing it with us. But we want to know from our viewers at home, has anyone read this or read all three? Because it's actually a trilogy. Right. And let us know what you think on our Facebook page, Expresso Morning Show, SABC3. We're going to take a quick break while you get onto our Facebook page and write your comment. We'll see you after this.
Stay with Expresso and SABC3.